to do that very thing. I think that's the nub of the matter.
Unfortunately, we have to go to statements by members. The honourable member for St. John's East will have 3 minutes left for questions and comments. And I know that there was an issue, technical issue with the honourable member for North Island Powell River. So as soon as the debate continues after question period, I would certainly look at recognizing the honourable member for North Island Powell River should she choose to come back on after that. Statements by members. The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Madam Speaker, lockdowns with no end in sight are being endorsed by federal leaders and are destroying our communities. The impact on Canadians' lives is severe. Ordinary people are being investigated by police for organizing peaceful protests against the lockdowns. Last week, I heard from a young business owner in my riding. She told me if things don't change soon, she will likely have to declare bankruptcy. The Liberal budget will be of no help to her. Others have confided to me that their children have had to be medicated to reduce suicidal thoughts. Tragically, the budget fails to address the surging youth mental health tsunami we are witnessing. Canadians look to their leaders for help, but instead their concerns appear to be falling on deaf ears. We can look south of the border to see many U.S. states have reopened and are better from an economic, social, and mental health perspective. It's time to recognize that quarantining the healthy helps no one, and to end these draconian lockdowns once and for all.
The honourable member for Cambridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. April 24th is Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day, a time to remember and reflect on the horrible crime which led to the deaths of over 1 million ethnic Armenians during World War I. During the month of April, we remember all genocides, the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, the Cambodian genocide, and far too many others. Governments and people around the world must recognize genocides for the permanent marks of hate they leave on our history. Tomorrow, I invite all Canadians to join in remembering with our large Armenian Canadian community through online ceremonies. Genocide must never be ignored or denied. As we honor those lost in the Armenian genocide, remember and proclaim, never again. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, des Etchemins-Lévis. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe you've been muted. Could you start over and try again? Yes, of course. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker. I was just saying that in 1971, the Canadian government launched the second language summer program for young people across the country. It's in support of our official languages. 250,000 youth since then have benefited from this program, including myself at Glendon College in Toronto. We helped better understand our second language and understand Canada's linguistic reality. Today, in 2021, the program is in its 50th year, and I think that should be applauded. We should warmly congratulate all of the people who helped the program succeed over the years through its implementation, its management, and its execution, so that millions of, or rather thousands of Canadians can benefit. Let's continue to support Explore, which consolidates our identity and language.
The honourable member for Avalon.
Madam Speaker, today I pay tribute to the life of Kenny Williams, who recently passed away at the age of 69 after a long, dignified struggle with ALS. Kenny was a son, husband, father, and grandfather, a friend to everyone who knew him. But most people knew Kenny from his 30 years of service to the hockey community on the Southern Shore and throughout the province. Kenny was a founding member of the committee that worked to get the Southern Shore Arena built in 1986 and worked as the stadium manager for over 30 years. He served on boards for minor, junior, senior, and women's hockey.
I'm sorry. Generally, we don't have points of order. Does the honourable member have a tie on? I can't quite see that, and a jacket. Maybe I'll come back to him. So I'm going to go to the honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Madam Speaker, the government finally announced in its budget help for seniors on old age security that it promised in the election. The problem is that it only applies to some seniors, The proposal is a one-time payment of $500 in August of 2021 and an increase of 10% to the OAS going forward. The catch, it's only for those 75 or older. There is no real justification for leaving out seniors under 75. The Liberals say many seniors have faced economic challenges as it took on extra costs to stay safe. And after a lifetime of hard work, they deserve a secure and dignified retirement. Can somebody tell me why this does not apply to the seniors aged 65 to 74? This government has created an apprenticeship program, junior seniors and senior seniors. This is ridiculous. The government must cancel this two-tier system and give the increase to all seniors 65 and older. Thank you.
The honourable member, l'honorable député de Alfred Pellon.
Honourable Member for Alfred Pellon. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Summer is a wonderful season in my community of Alfred Pellon. Above all, it's a time that young Laval residents, as well as our community organizations and businesses, eagerly await. Why? Because summer means Canada Summer Jobs. Because Canada Summer Jobs is essential, and the program makes a big difference in my community. This year, nearly $7 million will be invested in Laval through the Canada Summer Jobs program. In total, 1,618 quality jobs will be offered to young Laval residents throughout the summer. In my riding of Alfred Pellon, 331 young people will benefit from an enriching, formative, and socially enriching work experience within our community organizations and local businesses. To the young people of Laval, please apply for these jobs. They'll make a big difference in your future, and they will help support local organizations and businesses. Good luck. Have a great summer, and thank you.
I'm going to go back to the member for Avalon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to the life of Kenny Williams, who recently passed away at the age of 69 after a long, dignified struggle with ALS. Kenny was a son, husband, father, grandfather, and a friend to everyone who knew him. But most people knew Kenny from his 30 years of service to the hockey community on the Southern Shore and throughout the province. Kenny was a founding member of the committee that worked to get the Southern Shore Arena built in 1986 and worked as the stadium manager for over 30 years. He served on boards for minor, junior, senior, and women's hockey. In 2005, he received the Gold Stick Pin for his years of service on the board directors with Hockey NL. He was inducted into the Newfoundland Hockey Hall of Fame in 2015. He became a life member of Hockey NL and received Hockey Canada's Order of Merit in 2017. Kenny was passionate about hockey and about giving back to his community. I want to honour his legacy and thank him for a life of service to his community and indeed our province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Madam Speaker, I am blessed to live in beautiful Port Moody, Coquitlam, Anmore, and Belcarra, where we have mountains, dense rainforests, and salmon streams. Our local First Nations stream keepers, Burke Mountain Naturalists, Coquitlam River Watershed Roundtable, hatcheries, and other community groups work hard to protect our environment. But with climate change, BC's diverse biosphere is at risk. A year ago, I asked the Minister if Canada has a COVID-19 wildfire evacuation plan for communities. And lately, I've been monitoring local infrastructure because sewage overflows from torrential rainfalls contaminate creeks inhabited by endangered species. Madam Speaker, climate change calls for stronger infrastructure and emergency plans. That's why I'm pleased our party Secure the Environment plan includes investing in technology to improve early detection of wildfires and better predict their behavior. It also includes investing in the building of infrastructure that is extreme weather resilient and will help communities prepare for emergencies. Thank you.
The honourable member for Oakville, Oakville North, Burlington, yes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Women entrepreneurs are crucial to Canada's economic success, and supporting their innovation is key to ensuring a strong, inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Last month, our government provided $235,000 in top-up funding for HoC Regional Innovation Centre in Burlington, used to support women entrepreneurs. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, someone's interrupting.
Yes, I'll have the member restart in a second. I do want to remind members to make sure that all of their mics are completely off if they're not the ones that are up speaking. The honourable member for Oakville North, Burlington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Women entrepreneurs are crucial to Canada's economic success, and supporting their innovation is key to ensuring a strong, inclusive recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Last month, our government provided $235,500 in top-up funding for HoC Regional Innovation Centre in Burlington, used to support women entrepreneurs across Halton in navigating this crisis and to continue to grow their businesses. This funding is in addition to the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy funding previously provided to HalTech for a total of $543,300. HalTech provides important support to help a diverse group of women entrepreneurs to start up, scale up, and reach global markets. Activities include training sessions through cohort-based programming and mentorship opportunities. I'm proud of the hardworking women supported by HalTech, led by Shan McGrail. These women entrepreneurs play an important role in stabilizing and growing our local and national economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last election, we made a promise to seniors over 75. Budget 2021 proposes to introduce legislation that will increase regular OAS payments for pensioners 75 and over by 10%.
Sorry, it would appear that the honourable members...
Every year that follows. This August, a one-time $500 payment will be made to...
Just one moment, please. There seems to... Est-ce que ça va avoir un... I did try to advise the honourable member that there was an issue with his mic. I see the boom is down. Can he maybe replug it in? We'll start over.
Yes. No, not that.
And I would just ask all members who are virtual not to turn their mics on at all, no matter what. There's no, that's a lack of respect for the House. So unless you're being called on to speak, you're not to turn your mics on. So the honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Hey, Madam Speaker, I can be here. Is it okay now? Good. Okay, let's start the clock. Madam Speaker, last election, we made a promise to seniors over 75. Budget 2021 proposes to introduce legislation that will increase regular OAS payments for pensioners 75 and over by 10% in July 2022, and it will increase every year that follows. This August, a one-time $500 payment will be made to seniors 75 and older. 3.3 million seniors will benefit by the promise we made. This budget also supports seniors by providing $3 billion over 5 years to ensure national long-term care standards. This is all over and above previous commitments. For example, we saw one-time payments to seniors over 65 last summer. Prior to the pandemic, shortly after our first election, we increased dramatically the guaranteed income supplement that literally took hundreds of seniors in Winnipeg North out of poverty alone. Madam Speaker, we care about our seniors.
I remember for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to commemorate the 106th anniversary of the Armenian genocide perpetuated by the Ottoman Turkish Empire, where 1.5 million Armenian men, women, and children lost their lives. 106 years have passed since the horrific crime of 1915, yet Turkey continues to this day to deny its heinous crime. Turkey's continued denial of its history has fueled its current regime to continue on a path intended to completing the Armenian genocide, which it was not able to finish in 1915. Today, Turkey continues to use its massive wealth and military arms to put the security of Armenia and Artsakh under constant danger. To all Armenians in Canada and around the world, we stay committed to you and your cause and say never again.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Madam Speaker, throughout this pandemic, my constituents have consistently gone out of their way to help their friends, their neighbours, and those who have been isolated by COVID. We recently celebrated these COVID community champions at an event in my riding. The stories we heard were amazing, about church board members and nurses stepping up for parishioners, about gardeners tackling anti-Black racism and gardeners beautifying neighborhoods. There were advocates for the elderly and advocates for tenants, journalists for newcomers, musical entertainers for seniors, people fighting the pandemic on the front lines, and those fighting for the rights of persons with disabilities. Hearty congratulations to Mary Oko, Angel Bay, Demetria Ilchuk, Anne-Marie Moeller, Brian Tricaire, Julia Stewart, Gezigan Demisi, Stella Joseph, Deborah Gold, Kathy Brown, and the entire team of volunteers at Ronci Works and those fighting food insecurity at Feed It Forward. You are all COVID community champions. And I can say with absolute sincerity that on awards night, you inspired me to work hard to be a better neighbor. Merci beaucoup.
The honourable member Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Madam Speaker, a pandemic that has taken more lives than COVID is ravaging British Columbia. I speak of the opioid crisis. More than 1,700 people have died from opioids. In Maple Ridge alone, 500 have overdosed. Keeping people alive is critical, but helping them get a new life is so much better, and that's what recovery is all about. Despite a lack of federal leadership, there are still some excellent supports in my riding of Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. Intervisions has 2 facilities. Hannah House for women and Miller House for men have a combined 80 beds. Hope for Freedom is seeing great results at its lodge. The Salvation Army has an excellent Genesis recovery program. I want to recognize the staff and hard work being done at the Maple Ridge Treatment Center. The One Way Club and Celebrate Recovery also help those struggling with addictions. These organizations are mainly nonprofits that need our support as they provide life-changing support for so many. Thank you.
The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Madam Speaker, my riding of Fundy Royal is full of great tourism operators. Some have opened their businesses over the past few years, while many others have been in operation for decades. They are struggling under the current COVID restrictions to remain afloat and get through to reopening. Many have received limited support so far and are skeptical of any support from the federal government to get through to this summer. I hear from far too many businesses who are frustrated by the inaction of the federal government and are worried about what the coming months may hold for them. Conservatives have called for this federal government to ensure our economy's future by securing stimulus measures that are targeted to sectors which are struggling, like tourism. Canadians deserve a plan to get the economy growing again so that we can ensure a prosperous future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Madam Speaker, in Northwest BC, the railroad tracks run through so many of our communities. Day and night, trains over 1 kilometer long rumble through residential areas carrying dangerous goods such as diesel, propane, and methanol. If proposed terminal projects go ahead, the volume of dangerous goods will increase even further. While these trains are integral to our economy, the increase has communities concerned. They see derailments occurring and they worry about the risk of a major incident like the one in Lac-Mégantic. They wonder about response times and evacuation plans. Most of all, they wonder if federal regulations are doing enough to ensure a major incident never occurs in the first place. Recent reports from the Environment Commissioner and the Auditor General have shown their concerns are legitimate. People who live in Northwest BC, including those who work on the trains, deserve a federal government that's doing everything in its power to protect communities, workers, and our environment. We will not be silent until that basic responsibility is fulfilled.
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Abitibi Bay James Nunaviki. Madam Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute today to my sister, Nancy, who was diagnosed with breast cancer in November of 2019. Following a mammogram and a biopsy, she got the diagnosis and collapsed in tears. She recently had started a new life with her boyfriend, she had a good job, and suddenly everything had changed. 6 months of chemotherapy followed. In May 2020, she underwent a partial mastectomy and 23 radiation treatments. Nancy had to stop working in order to take care of her health. The 15 weeks of EI she was entitled to were ridiculously inadequate to help women like her who who are facing the biggest challenge of their lives, overcoming cancer. The 50 weeks of EI sickness benefits that we've been calling for would go a long way toward helping women like my sister and relieving them of an unnecessary burden of stress. Right now, they should be focusing on fighting their disease and trying to survive, and they deserve peace of mind. I'm proud of my sister for her courage and strength. With all my affection and love, I wish her a fast recovery. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Dundas, South Glengarry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to follow up on the upcoming tax deadline and my continued concern that there are millions of Canadians who are vulnerable to losing their benefits being renewed this July because they haven't been able to get their taxes done. The government says we can't do it, but let's take a look at last year. We were in a pandemic, we were under lockdown, and people were asked to stay at home. The government said we'll move the tax deadline to September and make sure there's a smooth transition to benefits. Fast forward to this year, we're in a pandemic, we're in lockdowns because we don't have enough vaccines, and we're being asked to stay at home. And the government says we're not going to move the deadline. The reason this matters is there are thousands of people who can't complete their taxes at home. They don't have computers, they don't have the capabilities of doing that. We see that. We had thousands of constituents in my office this past year had to cancel this month because they were asked to stay at home and not get their taxes completed. We need to help vulnerable people. We need to make sure there's a smooth transition. The government should be compassionate and reasonable, extend the deadline 2 months to help millions of Canadians out. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Brampton East.
Madam Speaker, on April 22nd, 1970, the very first Earth Day took place, bringing millions of people together as a way to create awareness surrounding the real and critical issues of climate change and global warming. Over 50 years later, we continue to educate and mobilize our efforts to help bring positive environmental change. The federal government is taking the necessary steps to help bring meaningful change and reverse the effects of climate change. Here in Brampton and the region of Peel, our federal government has invested in 43 new electric vehicle charging stations and most recently announced the single largest federal investment in the history of my riding of Brampton East to help create Brampton's largest transit maintenance facility. This facility will be equipped to transition to a fully electric fleet and help Canada reach its goal of net zero emissions by 2050. Madam Speaker, we can all make a difference in protecting our beautiful Earth when we unite together. Let's all do our part to protect our Earth for this generation and many generations to come. Thank you.
Briefly. Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, last night, Major Kelly Brennan gave powerful testimony. She told the committee that she was intimidated by General Vance to give false testimony. She said he bragged about controlling the military justice system, that he was untouchable and had the Minister of Defense under his control. This is shocking and deeply disturbing, but appears to be true. Will the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense admit that they were complicit in covering up allegations of sexual misconduct and in doing so have failed women in the military?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the question. Limiting all forms of misconduct, abuse of power, and creating a safe working environment for everyone in the defense team has always been a top priority of our government. We know that any organization, including the Canadian Armed Forces, must work hard to eliminate toxic masculinity that creates unacceptable culture. All avenues to a safer future for women serving the Canadian Armed Forces are going to be considered, and more work it needs to be done, and more will be done. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Madam Speaker, that is just not believable. And make no mistake, there are more questions to come for that minister. Speaker, Canada has been losing the fight against COVID-19 variants for months. Yesterday, the Prime Minister finally noticed, and he took some advice from our Conservative leader. But once again, it's too late for many Canadians. After a Brazilian variant outbreak ravaged British Columbia, after the Indian variant has been found in 3 provinces, how much longer will the third wave be in Canada because the Prime Minister was once again slow to act?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to protecting Canadians, we have stepped up every single step of the way. Mr. Speaker, we have taken measures to protect Canadians, to put in place some of the strictest border measures around the world, and yesterday was no exception. It shows that we are committed to continuing to act, to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And Madam Speaker, we are going to get through this third wave together because Canadians are committed to doing so.
Honourable Deputy Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, a month ago, when the Prime Minister was asked if border measures worked, his answer was simple. No, it actually doesn't work. And then he doubled down on that. In fact, since January 2020, and including yesterday, when we asked the Prime Minister if he would start to control flights coming to Canada, we got no for an answer. Well, yesterday, late in the day, the Prime Minister finally got a small ounce of what's just common sense to most, and he suspended flights from India and Pakistan. How many Canadians are going to be affected by COVID-19 because the Prime Minister was dreadfully late once again in making the right decision?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie ma collègue pour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. On this side of the House, Madam Speaker, we will always base our actions on scientific data. We have temporarily suspended flights from India and Pakistan while we continue to monitor the situation in the region. Passengers also need to get a negative test at their point of departure before flying to Canada. We continue to discourage non-essential travel. Madam Speaker, Canadian security will always be our highest priority. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Madam Speaker, it took a great deal of pressure for the Prime Minister to decide to close the borders yesterday night with countries with severe variant outbreaks. It is remarkable how long it took him to make this decision. When it's a matter of public health, it is critical that we not take chances. The Prime Minister has been exposing Canadians to serious risks since the beginning of his mandate. He has delayed on vaccines, the border, rapid testing. Does he realize that he caused this third wave? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Madam Speaker, we have the strictest measures in the world currently. While COVID cases increase all over the world, we are taking the measures that we need in order to protect Canadians from COVID and the variants. Yesterday, we temporarily suspended commercial and passenger flights from India and Pakistan for 30 days. We will continue to discourage non-essential travel because our government will always prioritize Canadian safety. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Madam Speaker, what's hard to understand is that the Prime Minister had already experienced the issue of the borders during the first wave. But once again, he is late to act. Doesn't he learn from his mistakes? It took pressure from the Conservatives, the provinces, and the media for him to finally decide to close the borders to protect Canadians. There are other countries where the situation is getting worse. Can the Prime Minister assure us that he will not delay and endanger Canadians' safety again? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have discouraged all non-essential travel. We have taken action on multiple fronts to protect Canadians. We will continue to base our measures on the judicious advice of our public health experts, and we will not hesitate to change our measures if needed. The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, the government has decided to start a universal childcare system in Canada, like we already have in Quebec. The problem here is that the Prime Minister seems to want to tell Quebec what to do with its share of the funding. He said that the budget proposes creating an agreement with Quebec which would improve the Quebec system. Madam Speaker, Quebec has been managing its child care system for nearly 25 years. It does not need advice from the federal government. Will the government agree to transfer these sums to Quebec without strings attached? The Honourable Minister.
The honourable member for her question, and I'd like to point out that for the first time in our nation's history, we are moving forward with a national plan to ensure that every family in Canada has affordable access to an early learning and childcare opportunities. We know from Quebec's leadership that this is not only going to improve the learning outcomes for young children in our communities, but allow more women to take part in the economy. Madam Speaker, as we go forward, we're going to engage in a collaborative way with the provinces to ensure this money is used at its most productive way so more women can take part in the Canadian economy as they have been able to in Quebec.
The honourable member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, I didn't get an answer to my question. I repeat, Quebec has been managing its childcare centres for 25 years nearly. We invented the model. To date, there are 0 federal childcare centres. None. So what experience is the federal government going to draw on to tell Quebec how to manage its child care funding? The Prime Minister was unnecessarily ambiguous when I asked him a question on this topic, so I'm looking for clarification to avoid a dispute that will not serve anyone. Will this government commit to transfer the funding to Quebec without strings attached? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, the Bloc Québécois could be praising the budget, a budget that delivers for Quebec. In aerospace, the Quebec-Toronto high-speed train, assistance for seniors. Now, on childcare, we are actually drawing inspiration from Quebec because Quebec is a pioneer when it comes to a system that is working very well. So this is actually going to increase Quebec's reputation throughout Canada. The Bloc Québécois should be happy. The honourable member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Madam Speaker, the Liberals are claiming that they are now champions of the French language, but that's not true. We are still hearing about the meager agreement with Netflix. In the recent budget, the Liberals did not earmark any specific sum to producing Francophone audiovisual content. This sector was already on life support. Artists are concerned, and the pandemic is making things even worse for them. Will the minister commit to earmarking specific sums for Francophone audiovisual production? This sector is essential to the survival of French. Yes or no? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his question. And I'd like to thank him for his hard work on behalf of the arts and culture sector. However, I would remind him that in the budget we respected one of our election promises to increase the funding for Telefilm Canada by $50 million, and a large share of that money will go to Francophone content, as is already the case within Telefilm Canada. So yes, there will be more money for Francophone audiovisual productions. Thank you.
Vancouver East.
An urban, rural, and northern housing strategy for Indigenous by Indigenous has been in the minister's mandate letter since 2019. Yet budget after budget, the Liberals fail to deliver. The minister's lame excuse is that they are studying it. Chair of CHRA Indigenous Caucus said, "The absence of such a strategy in Budget 2021 is a disgrace." President and CEO of the CAEH, who's also the co-chair of the government's National Housing Council, call it the most glaring disappointment. Will the Prime Minister immediately amend the budget to include an urban, rural, and northern for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy?
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to thank the member for the question. I think it's critical to understand that there is a report coming out of Parliament right now that stresses the need to co-develop a strategy around urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing. We are waiting for that report, and we will be acting on that report. In the meantime, I would direct her to the Rapid Housing Initiative, which she scoffed at the time, which promised to deliver 3,000 units of housing. We've now more than doubled that fund, but that program delivered close to 40% of the units to Indigenous housing programs. Our government is serious about an urban, rural, and northern Indigenous program. She will see the results of the budget. She will see the results of this program. But in the meantime, we have upped our game, and we are investing more than any.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Madame la Présidente, hier, le Parlement britannique.
Madam Speaker, yesterday the UK Parliament followed this Parliament's example and passed a motion to recognize the Uyghur genocide. Uyghurs are being forced to pick cotton and produce tomatoes. The measures that this government took in January to prevent exports are not effective. Other countries have implemented effective measures. Will this government implement effective measures to prevent these Chinese imports from arriving in Canada? The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. He reminds us that the whole world is watching China, and our message to China remains clear. We are watching as well. And more than ever, democratic countries must stand together to promote values of democracy and human rights, as must parliamentarians and parliaments around the world. And we welcome the decision by the UK Parliament. We understand it, and it is in a very similar situation to our parliamentary decision. And we will continue to let China know that we are watching every human rights situation that is important to all Canadians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For Wellington, Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, countries around the world are waking up to the threats from China. The Canadian Parliament, the UK Parliament, the Dutch Parliament, and the Biden administration all have recognized the Uyghur genocide. And yesterday, Australia canceled 2 China infrastructure agreements, both part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. When will this government do the same and withdraw from another Belt and Road Initiative? When will it indicate it wants to play no part in exporting China's authoritarian model and withdraw from the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we have said repeatedly in this House, the relationship with China remains to be complex and multifaceted. We will stand up for Canadian human rights and values around the world, including with China, and every action that we take with China will be in the best interest of Canada and Canadians. And we remind again the House that we are watching China on every aspect. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Quote, a budget that needs 700 pages of red ink says a lot about government motivations. After doubling our federal debt in only 6 years and spending close to $1 trillion, not moving the needle on long-term growth would be the worst possible legacy of this budget. Who said that? Robert Aslan, former top advisor to the Prime Minister, and Bill Morneau. If even Liberal advisors are starting to freak out about the forthcoming debt crisis, shouldn't Canadians be concerned as well?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, the honourable member seems to think that our pandemic response has been too expensive. I'll remind him that one of the most important things we can do to contribute to a growth-oriented recovery is to preserve the jobs that we have now. If he thinks our measures are too expensive, I would like to introduce him to a small business owner in my community who was able to keep the doors open because they had access to the emergency business account. I would like to introduce him to classmates of mine from high school who have a job at a local manufacturing facility that were kept on the payroll because of the wage subsidy. Our message to Canadian households and businesses is we will be there for you no matter what it takes, as long as it takes.
For Carleton.
Well, I'd like to introduce him to the 300,000 people who don't have jobs and the tens of thousands of small businesses who can't operate because his government failed to close the border and keep the virus out and failed to speed up and bring vaccines in. Right. As one businessman said the other day, this government has first world inputs, but third world outcomes. Why is it that this government thinks that it can only judge success by how expensive they can be rather than by the results that Canadians experience?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the thousands of small business owners that have done the right thing to protect the public's health by closing their doors when it is necessary to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Indeed, that strong public health response is what will enable us to rebound successfully. I'll remind the honourable member that in the months of February and March, the Canadian economy added 259,000 and 303,000 jobs respectively. As we continue to deal with the circumstances surrounding COVID-19, I expect businesses will continue to do the responsible thing, but we will be there for them to ensure that they can contribute to the recovery when it is safe to do so.
The Député de Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Madam Speaker, Yesterday, Major Kelly Brennan gave powerful testimony at the Status Women Committee. She said that she had been intimidated by General Vance to force her to give false testimony. He said that he boasted that he controlled the military justice system and even controlling the Minister of Defense. Why did this government ignore sexual misconduct allegations against General Vance for 3 years? The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, that could be further from the truth. We have absolutely no tolerance for any form of misconduct and want to acknowledge the courage of those who have come forward. We have always taken any allegations that were brought to our attention very seriously and taken immediate action. We will ensure that their full, thorough investigation is conducted. We also know there needs to be a total culture change in the Canadian Armed Forces, and that is why in Budget 2021, we have added $236 million that's committed to this budget to eliminate any form of sexual misconduct. Thank you.
The Honourable Member. Madam Speaker, thank you. Now, what I would say is that political leadership is very important. Now, experts are telling us that to obtain herd immunity, at least 70% of the population needs to be immune to COVID-19. In Quebec, vaccination efforts are very orderly, and there is a capacity to vaccinate more than 100,000 people a day. Same thing for Ontario, and at that pace, the province could already have vaccinated 10 million people, enough to reach herd immunity. Could the minister admit that Canada could already have reached herd immunity if the Liberal government had provided enough vaccines? The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, it's important to know that Canada is actually in the top 3 in the G20 of administration of vaccines, but Madam Speaker, it's also important that Canadians have worked hard to stop the spread of COVID, and there is still more work to be done, which means we have to continue to follow public health measures to ensure that Canadians are kept safe. In my home province of Ontario, we are seeing the spread of the variant, and I want to thank the healthcare workers for the incredible work that they do, and we need to support them and ensure that Canada can get hold of this crisis. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Avignon, La Métis, Matane, Matapédia. Madam Speaker, in 2008, Stephen Harper, in his Green Plan, proposed the following measures: to get out of coal, to invest in carbon capture technology, and to create the Clean Fuel Standard. This week in the budget, the Liberals proposed the following measures: 1, get out of coal; 2, invest in carbon capture and storage technologies; and 3, improve the fuel standard. Ottawa is still trying to pass off oil as a green energy. Madam Speaker, I am all for recycling, but can we make an exception for Harper environmental policies? The Honourable Minister.
We have a credible and tested climate plan that's already delivering results. We've made historic investments, more than $100 billion to build a cleaner, healthier economy with more good jobs for Canadians. This includes $17.6 million for climate and the environment in Budget 2021, $15 billion through the Strength and Climate Plan, $15 billion in dedicated transit, and $60 billion in the Pan-Canadian framework. We will continue to fight for climate change, invest in a cleaner future, and create a stronger economy.
The Honourable Member for Avignon, La Métis, Matane, Matapédia. Madam Speaker, I'm asking this because Canada's strategy seems to be identical to the one that Stephen Harper proposed 13 years ago, which was not a success. By trying to treat oil as a form of clean energy, Canada failed to reach the Kyoto targets in 2012 and the Copenhagen targets in 2015, as well as the Paris Agreement targets in 2020. How can the Liberals confirm that with the same strategies, they're going to reach a different result? Secretary.
Madam Speaker, when our government took office 5 years ago, Canada's emissions were going the wrong way, on track to be 12% higher by 2030 than emissions were in 2005. We've flattened the curve on pollution. We've negotiated Canada's first climate plan, a plan that is delivering the biggest projected cut ever to Canada's emissions. We're seeing the results. The target we've set is both ambitious and realistic, beyond our current grasp, but not out of reach, and it keeps us on a credible path to net zero by 2050.
The Honourable Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has left our frontline workers stretched to the limit. Retired nurses from across Canada have come out of retirement to lend a hand. But because they're currently receiving pensions, portions of their old age security benefits will be clawed back as they breach the threshold. Their skills and knowledge are invaluable during this pandemic, but they're being forced to choose between receiving benefits and providing care. Could the minister ensure retired nurses are not punished financially as they serve in Canada's hour of need?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, we are eternally grateful for our healthcare workers in this country during this difficult time. And we have committed to supporting healthcare workers as they help fight the third wave. We will do everything it takes to support them during this time, and we are eternally grateful, Madam Speaker. So we are committed to making sure that these healthcare workers get the support that they need.
The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The finance minister has recently suggested that interest rates are so low that we can't afford not to borrow. But we all know that interest rates change. New home buyers are stress tested to ensure they're able to afford a 2% or more interest rate increase. The Liberals have said that this is for their own good. Can the minister explain what our national debt servicing cost will cost Canadians when interest rates rise?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to remind the honourable member of the threat that was raised by the former governor of the Bank of Canada, Stephen Poloz, when he appeared before Finance Committee and indicated that the risk of deflation and the downward pressure on the economy is far greater, and that the right thing to do in the moment is to ensure that the federal government provides the kind of support that is necessary to keep Canadian households and businesses afloat through this pandemic. By making investments to help families keep food on the table and businesses keep workers on the payroll, we have preserved the economy and protected it against economic scarring so the economy can come roaring back when it is safe to do so.
Our member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Madam Speaker, the tax filing deadline is right around the corner, and many Canadians and their accountants are stressed. The Liberals' delays in securing vaccines allowed for this third wave to strike hard. So many Canadians have seen their jobs disappear or businesses closed. Covering the basics like rent, paying the mortgages, or groceries is difficult. They need relief from the extra stress of a looming tax bill. Last year, the minister did the right thing. Will she please do the right thing again this year?
The Honourable Minister.
Madame la Présidente, notre gouvernement comprend très bien.
Madam Speaker, our government understands that tax season is stressful for Canadians, and we will continue to be there for them at each stage of the process. In February, we announced that recipients of assistance and recovery benefits would not have to pay interest fees once they file their 2020 tax returns. We have also put into place assistance for tax filers for interest waivers if these fees are levied for reasons outside their control. That means that Canadians who need help during tax season will get it.
Southwest.
Madam Speaker, Monday's budget included a remarkable admission that veterans are unable to access programs because disability benefits are not being confirmed. An Afghan veteran in my riding has undergone multiple surgeries after being injured in an IED blast. For the past 6 years, he's been denied the critical injury benefit. 2 years ago, the Veterans Minister visited my riding and met his family. Instead of deciding, the minister suggested they appeal again. But the minister sets policy, so we ask again, are multiple invasive surgeries complex treatments?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, this budget that we brought forward is a budget that supports veterans and their families. We've invested $140 million to immediately cover mental health treatment costs while applications are being processed. An additional $15 million for the Well-Being Fund for organizations that are supporting veterans. We've also invested $45 million to reduce veterans' homelessness. Our government has and will continue to invest to improve the lives of veterans and their families. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Windsor West.
Madam Speaker, my home province of Ontario is deep into a devastating third wave. In Windsor, Essex, where many people work as essential workers, we need to cross over into the United States, and there have been calls to get them vaccinated urgently in the United States. As we have seen, a deal has been arranged between Manitoba and North Dakota. We need to assure our essential workers are protected so they can perform their vital roles for all of us. Will the PM use the strength of the Canadian Consul General offices and trade offices to help set up vaccines for essential travelers and workers going into the United States?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for this question, and we actually are grateful and implore more community partnerships to help ensure even more Canadians are vaccinated. We are absolutely committed to working with provinces and territories to ensure that essential workers are vaccinated, are prioritized, and we will continue to advocate for that. We will also are open and willing to work with additional partners that can help us because, Madam Speaker, we know vaccines are an important part of stopping the spread, and we thank our essential workers for their hard work.
Our member Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Madam Speaker, later today, the government's infrastructure bank is holding its annual public meeting. Only it's not a meeting at all. It's, wait for it, a series of pre-recorded promo videos. This bank has $35 billion of public money and yet can't deliver even the most basic level of accountability. No local government in Canada could get away with calling a pre-recorded video a public meeting. Is the minister worried that an actual meeting might raise questions about why the bank hasn't completed a single project in 4 years?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, smart investments that create good jobs require thoughtful planning. And when done right, they can be nation building. We need to ensure that every public dollar spent on infrastructure is creating jobs, attracting investment, fighting climate change, promoting social equity, and building the economy of the future. Madam Speaker, Efficiency Canada and other national organizations welcome the CIB's work in its recent growth plan, retrofitting our entire economy and creating more than 100,000 jobs every single year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since the very beginning of this pandemic, this government has been listening to small businesses and giving them necessary support. With the 2021 budget focused on a strong and inclusive economic recovery from COVID-19, can the Parliamentary Secretary tell us how much this budget will help Canada's small businesses not only to survive, but to thrive? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question and for his strong defense of small businesses. Our government has extended the wage and rent subsidy until so we can continue to support businesses, and we introduced a new program for a recovery hiring program, and we're investing in small businesses of tomorrow, whether it's in aeronautics, clean tech, or artificial intelligence. We are investing in our small businesses of today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Member for Service Moose Mountain.
Madam Speaker, rural Canadians are being put at a greater risk of getting COVID because of this government's inability to get vaccines in a timely manner. Recently, the drive-through vaccination center in Weyburn, Saskatchewan had to close because there simply weren't enough injections available to keep it running. In many cases, rural Canadians are now having to drive 200 plus kilometers into lockdown communities to get a vaccine, risking higher exposure. Does the minister realize her failure to get vaccines to the provinces is disproportionately affecting the health of rural Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, we of course want to thank all of the provinces for their collaboration and for their mobilization. My home province of Quebec is now, I think, over 30%, and I know Saskatchewan is approaching that number of at least one dose in the arms of our citizens. We have lots of vaccines coming in, 2 million Pfizer doses throughout the month of May, 2.5 million a week coming in during the month of June. We will have up to 50 million vaccine doses circulating in Canada by the end of June. And I know, Madam Speaker, the member joins with me in hoping that everyone signs up for a vaccine, does it soon, and that we can get this over with quickly.
The Honourable Member for York Simcoe.
Madam Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister has told Canadians they will need a booster shot every year to counter the new and deadly variants of COVID-19. But right now, the vast majority of Canadians have yet to receive any vaccine at all. And those who have are waiting months for their second dose. The Liberal government has failed to procure vaccines and has failed to increase our domestic production capacity. Can we expect the Liberals to fail in rolling out these booster shots too?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Madam Speaker, look for some news on booster shots coming later today, but I will say to the honourable member that, again, close to 30% of all Canadians have received a vaccine. Over 13 million vaccine doses have already been distributed in Canada. We will have 50 million doses up to by the end of June. We will have more than enough vaccines to cover all of Canadians, and I know, join with the honourable member in encouraging Canadians to sign up as soon as their turn comes to get a vaccine.
Honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, vaccine supplies in Kelowna Lake Country are drying up. Lakeside Medicine Centre, a local pharmacy in Kelowna, told local media that they could only guess when the next supply of vaccines would arrive, and they've heard nothing if any more are on the way soon. In BC, we are facing a third wave of COVID-19 and stronger lockdown measures due to the Prime Minister's failure to get vaccines to Canada faster and earlier. How can the Liberals be so out of touch with my constituents who are once again getting laid off, closing their businesses, and cannot see their family?
The Honourable Minister.
As the member knows, all the provinces are devising innovative distribution and all kinds of channels to get vaccines to citizens more rapidly. One thing is for sure, that the vaccine supply continues and is indeed going to increase over the coming weeks, with over 2 million a week of Pfizer vaccine alone during May, 2.5 million a week during June. That will bring us up to 50 million doses of vaccines available for British Columbians and all Canadians through the end of June. And I know we're all eager for Canadians to get vaccinated.
For Yellowhead?
Madam Speaker, as other countries are coming out of this pandemic, small communities in my riding, such as Breton, are just beginning to receive their first doses because of the Liberals' failure on procurement. Many of these communities have expressed concerns with delay and uncertainty of the timeline getting their first and second dose. In March, witnesses at the Health Committee confirmed the off-label interval was a decision exclusively based off procurement schedules. Madam Speaker, when will we get enough vaccines so we can stop rationing and use the manufacturer's recommended interval?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I know that the member will join me in hoping that the citizens of his riding in Yellowhead and indeed all Canadians have access very soon to the dose, and the evidence is that that will be coming very, very quickly to their first dose. The 50 million vaccine doses that we are expecting by the end of June are, of course, more than enough to cover the first dose, and indeed will make a significant dent into the second dose for all Canadians. And we know that that Canada is third in the G20 in getting that first dose to its citizens. We all look forward to the end of this pandemic, Madam Speaker, and I know that the honourable member joins me in encouraging his citizens to get vaccinated when it's their turn.
The honourable member for Saint Jean. Madam Speaker, the Bloc is proud to support sugar shacks, and that is why, as part of the My Sugar Shack at Home initiative, we introduced maple products to some 40 embassies to promote our businesses. But we didn't also imagine that we'd have to introduce them to the Canadian government, because there isn't even 1 penny in the budget for sugar shacks. No one in Ottawa realizes that the sugar shacks have lost 2 full seasons. 100% because of the pandemic. When will there be specific help for sugar shacks? The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Saint Jean. That's a nice first. When we're talking about restaurants that are only open in the spring, That's exactly what sugar shacks are, and their season can't be postponed. The shacks have lost 100% of their income in the past year during the first week and another 100% during the third wave, and no federal assistance is designed for their needs. But obviously no one knows about this. It's a business model that's only here in Canada. It's unique. It's not normal that after 2 pandemic springs, the federal government still hasn't realized that it must support these businesses that are a part of Quebec's heritage in the eyes of the world. When will they act to do something for sugar shacks? The Honourable Minister.
No, on n'a pas de...
We have no sound. Is your microphone plugged in? Yes. Listen, Madam Speaker, I'd like to answer both questions if I may. I think I'm allowed to because there was a technical issue. Yes, there was a technical issue. There was also a lot of noise. So please start your answer again, the Honourable Minister. I'd like to be able to answer to both questions, if I may, Madam Speaker, given the circumstances. I think it's kind of the same question twice, but go ahead and answer. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question because obviously many of us in the House of Commons were able to participate in the initiative My Sugar Shack at Home, many of us. So it's a wonderful initiative. I'd like to tell my colleagues, I'd like to reassure people that we're going to support our sugar shacks and also economic development throughout Quebec, and we're going to continue to help them. She can also speak to my office if there's one in particular that needs help, because we're going to protect our culture in this industry and help our entrepreneurs across Quebec. Thank you.
For Calgary Forest Lawn.
This woke Liberal government ran and hid from voting when it came to standing up for those being persecuted for their religious beliefs, proving human rights mean nothing to them. This is the same government that shut down the Office of Religious Freedoms, after all. There has been no plan for persecuted minority groups like the Sikh and Hindu refugees in Afghanistan or the Muslim Uyghurs in communist China. Why is this Prime Minister all talk and no action on standing up for religious freedoms at home and abroad?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I very much appreciate the question because this government has actually extended the Office of Religious Freedoms and Beliefs, and we have taken it in a much broader way to integrate it with our international human rights obligations. We've repeatedly have meetings with people from around the world and are exercising leadership in the International Contact Group on these issues, both at individual level as well as at a corporate level, and making sure that we as Canadians have a voice about international human rights on every subject which has been raised by the member. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Richmond Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This past weekend, Richmond lost another small business. After nearly 50 years of faithful services to the community, Hanson Travel was forced to permanently close its doors due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, Mr. Lau is not alone. I've heard time in and time again from struggling businesses in Richmond that this government needs to take steps to help support Canadians in the air travel industry, including travel agents. When will this government finally take real actions to support our tourism industry?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Obviously, we know that tourism operators and travel agencies have gone through difficult times. But that being said, we've been there since the beginning for them, and there's good news for them also in the budget. So I hope that my colleague will be able to share the good news, $1 billion to support the tourism sector, making sure that they can have access to the wage subsidy until September, the rent relief program until September, but also a lot of support through the regional development agencies hopefully there will be a new one in British Columbia. So that's also good news for tourism operators in her home province. Thank you.
Before I go to the next speaker, I'd like to remind the member for Carleton and the member for Kingston that they should not be going back and forth debating in the House while question and comments are being answered. For individuals who are actually listening virtually, they can actually hear what is going on as well, and it does disrupt the House of Commons. The honourable member for Provencher.
Madam Speaker, Churchill Wild is a world-class adventure tourism company specializing in polar bear watching, and it's based in my riding of Provencher. Like many in the tourism sector, the business is struggling thanks to border closures and travel restrictions. Every day that these measures persist, it makes it harder and harder to keep their doors open. The Liberal budget claims to have a plan for the safe reopening of our borders, but there is no plan. There's no timelines, and there's no data-driven schedule for the safe reopening of these borders. When will the Prime Minister deliver a real plan to help Canadians' tourism sector recover?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to reassure my colleague because obviously we have a plan to support the tourism sector. We've been there since the beginning of the pandemic for them. We are here for them now, and we will continue to make sure that we're there for them in the future. That is why we've invested $1 billion. It's an historic investment. I hope that my colleague will share that with his constituents, because obviously we need to make sure that they have access to money to survive the pandemic, but also make sure that they can really be able to invest in their business and create great destinations in the future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Madam Speaker, the pandemic has shone a light on systemic issues affecting long-term care facilities across the country. We have seen the devastating impacts of COVID-19 on those living and working in long-term care. We must do more to protect our most vulnerable. National standards of care of our seniors in Canada will ensure that regardless of where they live, all seniors will be treated with dignity. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health please tell this House how the government is taking action on this important issue?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for Scarborough Agincourt for this important question. And on a personal note, her strong advocacy has had a real impact on this policy, and I thank her for that. She's absolutely right that we need to protect those living and working in long-term care. Our seniors built this country and deserve safe and quality care and to be treated with dignity. That's why in Budget 2021, we provided $3 billion to create national standards for long-term care. We're going to work with provinces and territories to create these national standards, but Madam Speaker, we need to make permanent changes to ensure this never occurs again.
The honourable member Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Madam Speaker, the government says they have enforced some of the strictest border measures in the world. This couldn't be further from the truth. The so-called quarantine hotels have little to no security. 404 passengers have simply walked out of the airport with nothing more to worry about than a fine. Who knows how many more were just never caught? They allowed dozens of flights to arrive from Delhi with COVID-positive passengers, all while India now faces the threat of a double variant. When will this government get serious about keeping Canadians safe?
The Honourable Minister. Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we have been serious since day one. In fact, our measures at the border are some of the strongest. No matter the country of origin, travelers must submit a test prior to boarding. When they land, there's also a mandatory quarantine. Madam Speaker, then there's additional testing after when they continue their 14-day quarantine. And Madam Speaker, as a result, these measures are working. But I'd like to also point out, the health critic for the Conservatives actually supports releasing strong measures at the border. Does that member agree with her?
The honourable member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The unfortunate thing about this Liberal government is that they once again have let down Quebec and the fight to protect the French language. There's nothing in the budget this week to provide tools to protect and promote French in Quebec. The Minister of Official Languages was present at the emergency debate on the decline of French in Quebec last year. Action must be taken now. We cannot wait until after consultations on her white paper. We need action now. Why is this government abandoning French once again, French and Quebecers. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, my colleague who was asking the question asked me a question about investment in official languages in the budget, and clearly he didn't read the budget. But once again, I'll ask my colleague a question because there is funding for French in the budget in Quebec as well. There's also funding for French as a second language that applies to Quebecers and Anglophone Quebecers. We're going to work to strengthen the French fact in Quebec generally and also through the Official Languages Act. So there are also funds for this in the budget. So
in Melville. Yorkton Melville.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. Our veterans and members of the Canadian Armed Forces have put their lives on the line for Canada. Those that have experienced sexual trauma while in the military should not have to fight their government for compensation. The CAF DND sexual misconduct class action settlement is scheduled to close on November 25th, and for too many, the claim process is so painful that this deadline will limit the number of victims able to come forward. When will the minister extend the deadline for the class action and allow victims to come forward with a claim on their own time?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her question. We understand that it's important to invest in veterans, and our government has done that. That's why, after a decade of slashing and cutting the budget from the previous government, we spent $11 billion in new benefits and services. We have reopened the offices that the Conservative closed, and we have rehired 1,000 veterans that were fired by the last government. This government has supported veterans and their family, and we will continue to do so as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Malpeck.
Madam Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. There continues to be some confusion on the government's strategy to keep our communities safe and to improve public safety from gun and gang violence. Policies designed in Ottawa must produce results on the ground at the local level. What measures is the minister taking with and for the province of Prince Edward Island to improve the safety of our citizens from gun and gang violence?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci à mon Auguste.
Yes, I'd like to thank my esteemed colleague for his question, Madam Speaker. We know that many communities, both urban and rural, have had to deal with firearm issues over the past years, and we are presenting stricter legislation to better control firearms, but we're also going to continue to invest to fight against domestic violence and those who commit such crimes. There's $1.5 million to support very concrete measures to make our community safer. Thank you.
South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Madam Speaker, 1 in 5 Canadians live in energy poverty, paying more than 6% of their income on home heating. They can't afford the upfront costs of a home retrofit rebate program or take on more debt in the form of retrofit loans. Yet that is what the government is offering. The Liberals could have created a no-cost, turnkey, low-income program, just like the 2004 Jack Layton plan or the U.S. Weatherization Assistance Program. Why won't the Liberals use the billions of dollars that subsidize the oil and gas industry to help low-income Canadians?
Well, Minister?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We're taking action to fight climate change and grow the economy, and Budget 2021 is a critical step forward. Budget 2021 represents $17.6 billion that will help for a cleaner and more sustainable future. That includes $4 billion for the protection of our lands and oceans, over $600 million to protect and restore Pacific salmon, and $5 billion to support Net Zero Accelerator to help decarbonize heavy industry. Madam Speaker, we have an ambitious plan for climate change that will help all Canadians, including those in the honourable member's constituency. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Brampton Centre.
Madam Speaker, in spite of being fully capable, our government failed Canadians on domestic vaccine production in a timely manner. Canada is in the middle of serious situation of pandemic, but government keeps on bragging announcements of millions of dollars with no end result. How this government is going to justify slackness to the Canadians? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government has invested significantly from day one in biomanufacturing, recognizing that our country didn't have the capacity to produce its own vaccines. So we've made investment after investment all across the country, hundreds of millions of dollars, and now through Budget 2021, over $2.2 billion, so that Canadians are protected, not just now, but in the future. Because we know Canadians need these vaccines and are going to need boosters in the future. So our government is prepared. We're making the necessary investments. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And that brings us to the end of question period. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36, bracket 8A, I have the honor to table in both official languages the government's responses to 20 petitions.
Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Présentation de rapport.
Presenting reports from committees. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions.
Présentation